Are Americans smarter than Europeans? Are Europeans lazier than Americans? Maybe, maybe not. Do you know the TV show The Office? You probably do. But the original version was British, and then the version that got really popular was American. It was basically the same show with the same characters, but it was slightly different though, because the work culture in the UK or Europe is different than the one in the US.
Knock. Who's there?
KGB.
KGB?
Weaver asked the questions!
What the hell was that?
What are you doing?
In this video, I'm gonna cover the 10 main pros and cons of working in US versus Europe and what you can learn wherever you live about the best sides of both cultures. And hi, if you're new to the channel, my name is Tero. I am a Finnish family farmer turned mushroom-loving entrepreneur. And I've lived in 5 European countries related to this video. And then I've also lived in 4 other countries plus the US. And for the last almost a decade, I've been living in the US. I'm married to an American. We have 3 kids. I live in Austin, Texas most of the year, but then spend my summers in Europe. And along the way, I've been an employee, I've been an entrepreneur in both markets, and I've seen the pros and cons of those. And in this video, I'm gonna share some of those lessons I've learned along the way. And by the way, I've made also videos about the differences of the regions in general, US versus Europe. How is parenting different, US versus Europe? How do you travel in US versus Europe? So if you're interested in those, I'll link them below. But in this video, I'm gonna talk about the work cultural differences between the 2 regions. And this is, by the way, my YouTube channel, The Spore. I've been doing this for a few months as a side hobby. It's something I'm interested in, something I'm excited about, sharing things I've learned along the way. And I think in a few months, we've done pretty well. But one of my favorite topics is to talk about cultural differences between different regions and countries. It's something I'm fascinated about personally, but also I have a lot of unique experience of it after living in 10 countries and working in different regions, particularly in Europe and US, and people have been enjoying the videos as well. So today we're talking about work culture. So last time when I did a video about US versus Europe, and then we do these shorts, and we did shorts about the pros of America and then the negatives of America. And the negatives of America got a lot of engagement. People were saying is like, oh, you should just leave America if you hate it so much, because they didn't watch the full video. But just saying out of the gates that like, I'm gonna share positives and negative of both region, but nothing is perfect, nothing is bad either, so they're just different. Firstly, Americans work way more. Like, oh my God, what an insight. Like, I think everybody knows that, but I think it's important to cover first and get it out of the way, and then we can get into more juicy other topics. I worked in Finland, where I think there was an assumption that we work really hard, but everybody would leave work at 4 or 5, like on the clock. And I remember working in Switzerland, which is not that different from Finland. And people would not leave office at 4 or 5. If you left at 6, they were kind of like looking at you funny, and you were probably expected to leave at 6:30 or something. And then in the US, it was even more amplified. Granted, I first moved to New York, but it was pretty clear that Americans work more, and it was just the thing that was expected. The differences vary by country in Europe, but according to OECD, it's about 20% more than Americans work. The average work week in America is roughly around 47 hours a week, where like about 40% of people work 60 hours or more. I think that top bracket is pretty big. 40% is a big number. It's not like the top 5%, but top 40% work 60 hours or more. In Europe, notably Netherlands, people work like 29 hours a week, 29, and France, 35 hours. And I'll get back to that later. Not every hour is created equal either, because I have a lot of experience in France too. But Americans work more. The other obvious or somewhat obvious thing is vacation time. There's a lot of media coverage and social media posts about European vacations. Scandinavia, where I grew up, it's very extreme. People regularly have 6 or more weeks of vacation. In the US, I believe the average is about 13 days. People regularly start with 10 days of PTO. Sometimes if you're sick, you have to cover the PTO, versus in Europe, if you're sick usually. And Europe, it kind of starts with 20 days. So 4 weeks summer holiday, and then you get, after you worked a little bit longer, you usually get like a couple more weeks in the winter for skiing. But that's not just the vacation time, it's also when you reply to emails. Like in America, it's very common that at 6 p.m. someone will call you or send you an email. They just think that like, hey, you'll look at the email when you look at the email. And in Europe, it's frowned upon. Sometimes even legally banned to send emails past a certain hour. I think be it Slack or email or phone, it's more common to be flexible with work hours. in the US versus in Europe, there's more strict guidelines. I hate formality. I don't know, is it the entrepreneur in me? But like, I just love that there's flexibility on when you work. And maybe during the day, you can go to the gym or do other stuff or go to the post office when it's not as crowded. Versus when I lived in Switzerland or France, there was always huge lines to like certain services because it was the only time when employees would go there. And I love the flexibility that America offers. And I'm okay with answering emails or phone calls later at night. And if I don't, I just put the phone or the laptop away. Problem solved. Now, to amplify the high work hours and less vacation, there's also differences within the workday. Lunch break is probably the most obvious, but I'll tell you a story when I worked in France. I would go to the office and in theory, they were supposed to start between 8 and 9. There was a flex time. Very few people were there before 9. People start getting there at 9:15, 9:30. Then you take a first hour to drink coffee, kiss everybody in your floor or office and say hi. And then you take a meeting from 10 to 11 or 11:30. Then you have a lunch break about 2 hours. Amazing lunch, by the way. If this would be a race between the quality of business lunches, Europe wins all day long. Beautiful lunch, you chat, chit chat, you work another 1-2 hours, and then you leave at 3 or 4. So the work hours, even 35 sounds high to me based on my work experience, but within those 35 work hours, there's a lot of fluff. In Finland, there's like a legal 30 or 45 minute lunch break, but in Central and Southern Europe, it's pretty common to take a minimum hour, usually 2 to 3 hour lunch break. Versus in the US, you kind of eat on the desk. I feel like there's a lot of working lunches and working breakfast meetings. There's business lunches, business breakfast meetings. You eat on the go while replying to emails or listening to messages. That's just very common that way. To give you some statistics, apparently 1 in 5 of Americans eat their lunch on their desk. More than half of Americans have a lunch break of about 30 minutes. So under half of Americans take a lunch break more than 30 minutes. So that's pretty interesting to me. Now, you could say that a long lunch break is great, but I think at the end of the day, you're paying for it somewhere else, either in pay or you're paying for it at the end of the day or beginning of the day. And personally, I like to just get in, get it done, take a couple short breaks to stay fresh, and then go home and be with my kids. Americans are also way more motivated and hungry. There's this old saying that Americans live to work and Europeans work to live. And I think that's a pretty good summary of overall the mindset difference between the two regions. I mean, that's a little black and white, but it gives you a good context. In the US, there is a big hustle culture, people ambitious. Granted, there's also student debt. So when people get out of college, there's pressure to pay back the student debt. But people are just like more maybe competitive, more excited. In Europe, it's just not the case. Again, like you could say is like, oh, the work-life balance in Europe is better. And I'll get to that in a bit when I talk about the positives of Europe. But at the same time, like I love the energy and optimism. I'd rather be around optimistic people, even if they're overly optimistic, versus pessimistic people. And same with like people who are excited about what they do and are motivated to do a good job. Related to this is I've noticed that in feedback and communication in Europe, there's a lot of criticism. I'm involved with a company and there's a board member who's European, and however well the company does, he always critiques the management all the time, critiques the management. And in the US, there's a more of a positive mindset. Like, you can do it. Let's get it done. Let's just, like win in the trenches, like just roll up our sleeves and get it done. And I love that, honestly. Like, I think the constant criticism and negativity of Europeans, particularly in business environments, deteriorates the company and its culture. And I think it leads to the next thing, which is innovation and happiness. I weirdly think that despite the higher work hours and energy, people in the US are clearly more innovative. And I think it's because of this positive mindset. If you look at the largest companies in the US, they're all formed within the last few decades. And if you look at the largest companies in Europe, they were formed a long, long time ago. And if you look at the startup success of Europe, it's a fraction of the success of US. And you could argue that the whole world depends on US innovation. For better or for worse, US, particularly in technology in the last years, have created a lot of the advancements that we have globally, and or other innovation is relied on US innovation. I think tech aside, be it health and wellness, people are more open to new ideas. Europe is way more traditional and close-minded and critical. And when they hear something new, they ask what's wrong it or why is it not real? Versus Americans are like interested and they take risks. And just like that forward-looking attitude is, I think, what we need in the world. The world faces a lot of fundamental issues, some created by America, by the way. But in general, like we need solutions, we need new ways to think about stuff. Clearly, this one is not working. And I also think economically, it's just like a race to the bottom with Europe if there is no innovation. So entrepreneurship and innovation are critical. And then last, the positive, at least for me, is that US is way more casual. It's way more casual in how you dress. Europeans will probably make fun of Americans or how they dress. I sometimes do. And also sometimes I dress like a homeless person. So it's not that different. But in Europe, when I worked, I wore a suit and tie. I remember like at Workday, they said we have a casual dress policy. You don't have to wear a tie on Fridays. So that was the level of casual. And here people are flip-flops and jeans and t-shirts, and that's more common. I think it's even more common now than when I moved here. But it's also casual in how people talk. Like in Europe, I remember like with Germans, I had to think about who do I copy in an email first. You have to use titles, be very formal on how you start an email, how you finish an email. And here it's just about getting the stuff done. I think the formality hurts innovation and also happiness. And I think it's kind of unnecessary as long as nobody's rude and people are respectful, which I think generally most Americans are, is polite and respectful. I think it's just about whoever gets the best idea, however gets it done, and keep it brief and don't worry about formality, particularly with email. So now let's get to the positives of Europe. There are many. If you're still with me in this video, you probably heard a lot of negatives about Europe, but there's many positives and vice versa with America. And one of the most underrated positives about Europe is people drive less. There's a much shorter commute. And even in cities like, let's say, London, where people commute a long time-wise, it's on a train. It's way more comfortable. You read a book, you take a nap, whatever. But in America, there's just like too much driving. There's driving to work all the time. And yeah, you can pop a podcast here and there and make the best of it. Especially from Monday to Friday, like just the amount of driving is no bueno. And in Europe, you just don't have that. There's more walking. People, therefore, I think partially one of the reasons why they're slimmer. There's more public transport. It's more ecological, more affordable. You don't have to worry about parking, all these other positives. But most importantly, I think people are happier when they commute less and drive less. So I think that's a huge positive in Europe. The other part is that I feel like the water cooler conversations in Europe are way more interesting. Now, I think water cooler conversations happen everywhere. I mentioned the French example. They chit chat for a coffee in the morning for an hour. There's a lot of catching up, but it's catching up mostly around family and friends and culture and politics and events in the world. Versus in the US, it's so much about culture, particularly like TV shows. Like it's a lot about like, what shows have you been watching? What's a great new show you like? Did you see this show? Oh, that show is amazing. You should check it out. And then you have your Netflix and Disney Plus and Paramount and Max and whatever subscriptions. It's just like a lot of focus on TV and or sports. Now, slowly sports are growing on me, particularly NBA and college football. Slowly, it's taken a long time. And I'm still not a fanatic about it, but it's the amount of sports and TV is just ridiculous. And I think it's a fun thing occasionally, but it's like chewing gum for the brain versus in Europe, you have more in-depth conversations and you get to know people personally a little more. Coworkers maybe care a little more about each other than in the US. And at the same time, I think you learn more from your coworkers in Europe than in the US. So that would be a positive for Europe. The other part about Europe that I love are the benefits. Now, this is a dicey subject because it has gone too far in Europe, I think, and it's hurting innovation and entrepreneurship. But in general, like some of the perks and benefits such as lunches and other things. Granted, the taxation is high and you pay for it in other ways, but I still think that like the benefits that European employers tend to offer is nicer than the benefits that the US employer offers. Again, you pay for it somehow with lower income, so it's not all gravy. And when you have too many of these, particularly like the challenge of hiring and firing employees, then like it's riskier for businesses or entrepreneurs to hire people because the firing is so expensive. But that also happens here in, let's say, in states like California. But in general, I am pro employee benefits, and I think that's a big part. I think for companies, it also makes sense because they're tax deductible in different ways in most legislations. So just giving employees more benefits and more perks will cost you probably less than the salary increase because of the tax benefits, but they're happier and healthier. But it can go too far and then everybody's happy if the ice cream machine or the espresso machine is not working and then they can't get their work done. So it can go too far, particularly around the firing principles, and the severance that you have to pay can get stupid, but I would still give a slight +1 to Europe on this record. Okay, I have one more benefit about working in Europe versus the US. And if you probably followed, you realize there was more benefits to working in USA than there was for Europe. And I truly do believe in this, that it's better to work in the US. But this last one that I'm gonna talk about as a benefit to Europe might outweigh all of them. It is a big one, and it is around health and longevity and happiness. Work-related stress is very common everywhere in the world. Mental health issues, it's a global phenomenon, but it is highlighted in the US, partly because of long work hours, high expectations if you don't feel like you're meeting the expectations, also being in debt, credit card debt, student debt, living paycheck to paycheck. It just creates more pressure in the US. And I think some of the pressure creates the innovation and excitement and energy, but when it goes over in a bad way and it hurts people's health. Chronic illnesses are way more common in the US. Longevity is worse. People have to spend more in healthcare, out of pocket and through tax dollars. It's overall worse system. Now, it's not just about the work. It's also about other things like food quality and pharmaceuticals and this and that. But overall, it is tougher. It's a tougher game to work in the US. The price is much bigger, but if you don't meet the price, you pay a hefty fee for it. And that is not for everyone. And because at the end of the day, we're all gonna die. It's not like we're not gonna die, but health is wealth to me, and it's probably more important than money in many ways. So for that reason, I would say this is a big one. So even though there's more positives, I think, with the American work culture, this is the one big negative that might outweigh them all. So if you're an American, you probably want to take care of your health. Like I said, if like wherever you live, US, Europe, or somewhere else, you can learn from both systems. And if you live in the US, you just have to put more effort into being healthy and avoiding these stressors and chronic illnesses while remaining happy and excited about work and motivated, which the rewards and the taxation and the systems in the US allow. In summary, Europeans commute and stress less, which is a good thing. There are benefits to the slower paced lifestyle and enjoying life. At the end of the day, we don't live to work, but we work to live. Now, I do believe you should work on something you're passionate about, that you're excited about, so it's not just a work. But nevertheless, I do align a little philosophically more with the European system. I just think that it's gone too far. And both as an entrepreneur and as an employee, I would rather be in the US. But in brief, like work or build businesses and equity in the US and vacation or retire in Europe. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below where you live and what do you like or don't like. And especially if you have experience of both, I'm very curious to hear. And if there's one that really resonated with you or I forgot, leave a comment below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video. Ciao, ciao.